Hey folks, in this guide we're going to go over 12 different lightly modified weapon options that'll keep you competitive versus geared PMCs as well as regular scavs, raiders, and bosses while staying on a budget. Before we get started, it's important to understand that the damage you deal in Escape from Tarkov is almost exclusively decided by the ammunition you're firing and not by the weapon itself. The statistics of your weapon, such as ergonomics, recoil, rate of fire, and muzzle velocity, help determine how effective your gun will be at aiming down sights, how easily you can control the spread of your shots, how much extra you may need to compensate your aim for longer shots, but otherwise has no effect on the actual damage dealt. I can't tell you how many times I've survived fights I shouldn't have because the person shooting happened to be a newer player who brought in 545 PRS ammo, which is virtually no armor penetration, probably because it was cheap and he just didn't know the difference. There's actually a lot of great armor penetrating ammo in EFT, but much of the higher end ammunition costs anywhere from 600 to nearly 1500 rubles per bullet. That said, it's important to first look at which cheaper ammunition options are available that'll still be effective and choose our weapon loadouts from there. Now, none of these bullets are the highest armor penetration in their caliber, but they all have the stats to get the job done without costing nearly as much as the highest tier ammunition. M80 and LPSGs at H, for example, both reach a critical breakpoint in that they deal 80 damage, which is just enough to one-tap with a chest shot, and they have great armor penetration as well. The rest of the ammo on this chart may look a bit weaker by comparison, but will all be fired from fully automatic weapons to compensate. SP5, for example, while technically the worst of the 9x39mm ammo, has 68 flesh damage, enough to blacken an arm or leg with just one bullet, not to mention a halfway decent armor penetration score of 35. When coupled with the incredible fire rate of the VSS, this round is surprisingly powerful and highly overlooked in my opinion, costing only 150 rubles per round as compared to 600 plus for the rest of the rounds in this caliber. While there are a lot of other honorable mentions on this chart, let's get into the fun stuff and build some cheap, effective weapons and talk about the ammo choices a bit more as we go. Since we were just talking about SP5 ammo, let's start with the VSS. Now I chose this weapon over the AS Val mainly because it's cheaper on the flea market, but both are great and require very little modding to make them ready for a raid as they naturally have super low recoil. If you have a Val in your stash and want to use that instead with these same mods, that'll work just as well. Now, modding for this is super duper easy. I recommend though, they usually come with a 10 round mag. I would at least buy 20 round magazines for it. These will run you about 6 or 7K on the flea market. It's just called 20 round 6L25. Actually, if you type 9x39 on the flea market, you'll get like all the Val and VSS ammo and magazines to show up. But these are your cheaper option. They do make a 30 round magazine for this gun, but they're super expensive by comparison. So for a budget build, I really can't recommend them, but if you want, you could do something like we did with the AK and begin the raid with just one bigger mag and then have all the smaller 20 round mags as your backup throughout the rest of the raid. Now for a sight, the cool thing about the VSS is it has a dovetail adapter on it, so anything that's dovetail ready can go right on it. So the Pp9 Reflex Sight is probably your easiest option. I can't really get it to show you there, but it has a little kind of green triangle reticle. You could always try it out in your hideout if you're not sure what it looks like, or in an offline raid if your hideout's not upgraded yet. But I think this sight's pretty nice. If you're not a big fan, or if you want to spend a little less, you could get an EKP Cobra sight. These little sights are super cheap. This is less than 10K from the vendors of the flea market. The problem is it takes away 7 ergonomics, so it's not my favorite, but it is a nice budget sight. If you would prefer to use your reflex sight of choice, again for me that'd be a PK06, you could pick up an SVD low side mount, and this will let you put pretty much any sight right on top. It's going to give you a rail that'll be pretty darn close to the gun. It's going to be risen up just a little bit, but it's not too bad. So that's one option if you don't feel like going with a reflex sight. And then if you prefer a ranged choice, I would recommend the Zenit Belomo PSO 1M2-1. Now there's 3 different PSO scopes in the game, but the 1M2-1 is the one that's been in the game for like a couple years now. This is the one that has the larger red chevron in the middle. Well, you can change it to red, I should say. But I super prefer this one for range combat. Typically though, on maps when I'm going to use a VSS, it has such a high fire rate at 900 RPM as opposed to the 650 on an AK. You're really just spitting bullets. You probably want to be up close usually when you're using this thing. So typically reflex sight is going to be better for you. But again, if you want a ranged option, at least you have one. Now as some optional mods, you can get an RP1 charging handle for AKs. and these actually will fit on the VSS and the Val as well. It actually kind of just goes on top of the gun's actual charging handle here. We slap it on, you'll see it'll show up there. All it really does is give you one extra ergo. Makes the gun look kind of cool. But they're super cheap. These are only like 2,000 rubles on the flea market. So it's a nice little quality of life upgrade, but it's certainly not necessary. Another nice optional modding thing you can do though is if you pick up a TAWS 6P29M mount, this thing actually just slaps right onto the gun in the front, and it will hold foregrip and up to 2 tactical devices. So this is a good way to get a laser or a flashlight on your gun if you want to. And these are fairly cheap on flea market. Jaeger's got them for 7.6K. Looks like players are selling them for about 10. So again, it's an optional quality of life upgrade. If you do go with a foregrip on it, I would recommend the Magpul RVG Grip Black. This thing will give you -3% recoil and +7 ergo, and it's a relatively inexpensive grip. It's not the very best on the market, but it's pretty good for the money. If you guys already have a grip in your stash that you'd rather use, you can just throw on whatever you want. This is just more of a recommendation. For modding though, it's pretty simple. I would actually take off the rear sight because you're not going to need it. If you're ending up putting any red dot on here, you might as well just sell it, get a little extra money. Take the 10 rounder out. Make sure you empty it too if you want to keep the extra bullets. And we'll just fill up a 20. Stick it in there. Make sure you chamber your gun as well. I guess I already did that. So we've got one in here, so 21 bullets at the ready. This will also stop him from, cocking the gun when you first get in the raid. Put on your sight of choice. OKP7 is pretty much your cheap way to go. This is a very simple modded gun, but it'll be super effective. And then again, if you want to add a grip, maybe like a flashlight or a laser, go for it. You can throw a little charging handle on there, even make it slightly better. But in any case, this gun already has super low recoil and really good ergonomics. It's just really strong all around. The only time it really kind of suffers is at long range. The velocity, the muzzle velocity is ultra low on this gun at only 300. Just compare real quick to like the AK at 900. So the bullets do drop off faster on this than they would on like an AK or something from far away targets. But again, with a high fire rate like that, you're usually looking to be clearing buildings and small rooms like the customs dorms or like the buildings on reserve more so than sniping with it. Let's move on to some basic AKs. Now we're actually going to work on both the AK-74M and the AKM at the same time because they each take nearly the same parts despite being of a different caliber. For the AK-74M, I highly recommend starting with either 545 BP ammo or BT ammo, as each round is around 300 rubles on the flea market. You can also find boxes upon boxes of these in the military reserve map, so you may want to pick those up as often as you can on your PMC and scav runs if you find yourself enjoying this weapon to further cut costs. The BP ammo has just a little less armor penetration and a bit higher damage than the BT. The main difference here though is that the BT is a tracer round, so just keep that in mind if you're running around on a lot of longer range outdoor maps and you want to keep your position less known. Now the cost of the AK-74M is very low. You can actually get these on the flea market for around 25 to 30,000 rubles. I think that's partly due to the fact that you can also craft them at the workbench in your hideout. Now the name of the game is budget, so for modding, we want to get the most recoil and ergonomics benefit we can for the least amount of money spent possible. For this, I went with PWS CQB 74 545 muzzle brake. This thing costs around 10,000 rubles. It's going to give us 11% recoil. This is pretty huge. Next we have the Rk3 Pistol Grip. This is essential. I use this on most of my AK builds. You can buy these for like 8,000 rubles on the flea market, maybe a little more. You get 13 ergonomics out of it, as opposed to the 6 ergonomics that the basic grip has. Next, and this is just a preference for me, I like to pick up the Tactica Tula TT01 rear sight adapter. If you just type TT01 on the flea market, this will come up. This actually replaces the slot where your rear sight is in the middle of the gun and lets you put any reflex sight of choice on it. If it's, well, any small reflex sight of choice on it. And for me, that reflex sight of choice is the PK06. I love this thing. It's super small. It usually costs around 16,000 rubles. Really nice sight. Only takes away 1 ergonomics. This is an excellent sight, and it's my go-to for just about any weapon. Then the stock for this is not bad for a budget build. It'll give you 37% recoil and just 2 ergo, and you can actually throw a recoil pad, the GP25 recoil pad on top of it. This will give you another 5 recoil for a total of 42, and 1 more ergo for a total of 3. This next piece is awesome. The Polymer AK100 series foregrip. This thing costs like 2,000 rubles on the flea market. It's so cheap. it'll let you put a foregrip and one tactical device on it. So there's not a lot of modding options here, but it's just enough. For a grip on that, I prefer the RVG Grip Black. This thing will give you 3% recoil and 7 ergo. It's a relatively affordable grip. But if you've got a grip of choice, feel free to throw on whatever you have in your stash just to cut costs. You don't always have to buy whatever I do, but this is just a recommendation. I think this is a pretty nice grip. It also looks great. It keeps the gun all one color. Now for optional mods, I like to take one 60-round magazine with me. This will run you about 20-25K on the flea market. I think it's really worth it for that early PvP that you tend to get, especially on maps like Customs. If you run into a group of 2 or 3 guys, you can mow them all down without having to reload. And it also reduces the number of extra mags you have to carry, in my opinion. For example, on this loadout to the left here, I'm actually using the gun that we're about to build. I've got one 60-round mag and a couple backups here, and then when you get a pause in between fights, you can hide in a bush or like a room or wherever and repack your 60 from there and stick it back in the gun. You're good to go. We've also got an RP1 charging handle, again optional. This thing's only like 2,000 rubles on the flea market. It'll give you +1 ergonomics. It's not a huge boost, but you can see it actually goes on top of the little charging handle slot here. If you do choose to buy it, just slap it right on. Blam, 1 extra ergo. It's kind of nice. I think it looks cool too. And lastly, if you do choose to put a tactical device on the side of your handguard here, I recommend the X400 flashlight, as it also has a red laser option. Lasers will help reduce your recoil when you're not aiming down sights. And of course the flashlight is just nice for clearing rooms and looking for loot. These are super cheap. You can get them on the flea market for like 6K. I definitely recommend it, especially on maps like Interchange or Shoreline. There's like a ton of dark rooms that you're going to want to be looting and clearing. So for modding, we just take off the old pistol grip, the old muzzle brake, the old handguard. Make sure you leave the gas block on. So this is where the gas block is. Pull just the handguard off and not the whole thing. So the gas block stays. And we're gonna take the rear sight off too, because this TT01 rear sight adapter is gonna go in place of it. We'll stick our sight of choice on, put the TT01 on, blam, right in the middle of the gun. Looks good. On your handguard, you can stick your foregrip and your tactical device of choice if you have one. You got your pistol grip, muzzle brake, butt pad. Throw the charging handle on there if you want. And then, like I said, if you want to run a bigger magazine, go for it. We'll just take out the old one, pack up the 60, and I like to make sure there's a round in the chamber as well. Blam, good to go. For the AKM, we can pretty much modify this weapon the exact same way, and for a cheaper overall investment, as the 7.62 PS round is only 87 rubles from level 1 Prapor, and has about the same armor penetration as the 5.45 BT and BP we just talked about, but with higher flesh damage. The AKM definitely has a bit more kick to it, however, but we'll get that recoil low enough to make this gun manageable. So as you can see for modding options, we have almost the same parts picked out. We have the Rk3 Pistol Grip, a TT01 rear sight adapter, and a PK06 to throw on it, a butt pad for the stock. We have the AK100 series foregrip again, with the same RVG black grip, and X400 optional. You can also put the same charging handle on this gun if you want to. The only difference here is the muzzle brake. Since this is 7.62, you need a totally different muzzle brake for the caliber. The Dynacomp, this thing is actually only around 3,000 rubles on the flea market. It's actually way cheaper than the muzzle brake for 5.45. It'll give you 8% recoil benefit. So this is a pretty solid cheap option. And then as another sort of optional upgrade, instead of doing the butt pad on the buttstock, you can actually pick up a Fab Defense Buttstock. This is around 14K on the flea market. It's going to give you 46% recoil and 14 ergo. We'll just compare that to the base buttstock. Will give you 37 plus 5, so you get 42 recoil and only 3 ergo. So you're going to get 4% more recoil here, but you're actually going to get 11 more ergo. So this thing will aim down sights a lot faster. You'll be able to react a lot faster with this buttstock if you're willing to pay a little extra. It's not necessary, but I think it's a nice quality of life upgrade. For modding, it's the same deal though. Take off the rear sight, the pistol grip, the handguard, but leave the gas block, and the muzzle brake. And then if you want to, you can take off the buttstock. Again, that's up to you. And we'll put our sight on the TT01, put on the pistol grip, put on the Dynacomp muzzle brake. We'll get our handguard on there with the flashlight and the grip. And then again, you can throw a butt pad on if you want. The nice thing about the Fab Defense stock though is you don't need any funky adapters for it. It actually does just click right on into the place of the old buttstock. And then, just like the last one, the charging handle will go right on if you want to for an extra ergo boost. Now with either one of these guns, if you're gonna go into a map where you'd rather have a ranged scope, I think the cheapest way to get it on there is gonna be to pick up a Bastion dust cover. To put this on, you're gonna need to remove any rear sight you have, whether it's the TT01 or the rear sight that was already there and the dust cover. And then you can put the new dust cover right on. And this has a giant rail on it that'll let you put any scope of choice. I'm a big fan of the Valde myself. This thing has a really nice clean reticle. You can also do the new Monstrum, which is a 2x scope. It's one of the only 2x's in the game actually right now if you just want a little bit of zoom but without going too crazy. But whatever you want, you can just slap right on there. You can just kind of make this a really viable weapon for a longer range map like Shoreline, or if you want to do a little bit of sniping with it or something. Now we come to one of my favorite bullets in the game, the mighty M80 round. As mentioned earlier, with 80 damage and 41 armor penetration, this round is capable of one-shotting up to a level 4 armored target in the chest, and will one-tap the vast majority of helmets in the game as well. The trick is finding a vessel that'll fire this round without breaking the bank too much. Here we have the semi-auto Vepr Hunter, which you can pick up for around 35,000 rubles on the flea market, and the M1A, which you can find for around 50,000 rubles on the flea market. As an honorable mention, you could also very cheaply mod out a Remington Model 700, a bolt-action sniper rifle, which can be really handy on larger open maps such as woods, especially if you're into squad play. Though if you've ever caught one of my streams, which you can find a link for down in the description, you know I tend to run as a lone fox. Now for modding, there's not a lot you can do with the Vepr Hunter. It does have a dovetail adapter, so you can put any dovetail sight on it, such as the OKP7. Just note that it'll rise kind of high above the weapon. If you want to get rid of that, just like the AKs, you can take off the rear sight and buy a TT01 rear sight adapter for around 3,000 rubles on the flea market. And you can fit any smaller reflex sight onto that. Again, I prefer the PK06, it's just one of my favorites. These are about 16,000 on the flea market. Just put it on like so. Now it's nice and tight to the gun. I find this to be the most effective for me. If you prefer a long range option though, you could put a PSO scope on it. I prefer the PSO 1M2-1. This is a 4X scope. This has been in the game for a long time. It's got that little red chevron in the middle. I'm a big fan of that. It does rise high above the gun again, but this is pretty much your best for a ranged option. But if you want to put any other scope on it, you can buy an SVD low side mount. This will clip onto your dovetail slot. It'll give you a rail, so you can put pretty much any scope you want on there. You can put like a big old Valde, or even just a little reflex sight, whatever you feel like really. But my favorite is just go with the TT01, and then usually the default with these is 5-round magazines, but you can buy these little VPO 101 10-round magazines. That'll make a huge difference. This is the biggest magazine you can buy for the gun. This will give you a better chance if you run into a squad of players or like a scab boss like Gluhar or Rashala who has bodyguards with him. You definitely want a higher capacity magazine just to be able to take those guys out without having to reload as much. Next we move on to the M1A. There's actually a ton of modding options you can do for this gun, including swapping out the entire chassis, longer barrels, suppressors, all sorts of muzzle brakes. But for the sake of budget, we're going to keep it simple. You actually can just slap a reflex sight right on it as is and pretty much be good to go if you want. If you don't like the sight being up that close, however, you could buy an ARMS number 18 mount for M14. This is super cheap on the flea market. This will actually fit into the middle of the gun. You can put your sight on that instead, but it also can fit a scope as well. So if you don't want to run a reflex sight, again, you can put something long range like a Valde on it. That'll be pretty good to go. This comes with 20-round magazines. You can upgrade to 30 rounders for pretty cheap. There are also 50 rounders available. Those get a little bit more expensive, but it's up to you, whatever you're comfortable with. And then lastly, like if you're gonna put a sight on it anyway, I would take off the just the rear and front iron sights, because they're really just gonna get in your way a little bit, and you might as well just sell them for a little extra money. But I'm a huge fan of this gun. Personally, I would take it in just like this, just with a little sight on it when I'm on a budget. Even just with 20-round mags is fine. You can drop people super fast with this thing. It'll fire as fast as you can click. It's a super strong weapon. Lastly, we got the little M700 here. If you've actually spawned with this on your scav, it'll often come with this scope here, but if you don't have one, I'd recommend picking up on the flea market the Burris Full Field TAC 30. If you just type TAC 30, it'll come up on the flea market. This has a nice clean reticle, really long zoom. It's excellent for maps like Woods. And to mount it on, you just need a 30mm ring mount, Remington Integral, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so 30mm ring mount. If you're wondering how to find that, you can actually just right-click the gun and hit link to search. And you should be able to find it that way as well. Go to mounts. Boom, there it is. 3,200 rubles, 3,500 from the vendor, so nice and cheap. But you just slap that right on top, and the scope goes right inside it. Now this gun, you can buy larger mags. It comes with a 5-rounder, but the Model 700s can actually be top loaded. So if you have it equipped and you have bullets either in your rig or in your pocket and hit R, it'll actually just start loading right from the top, like one bullet at a time, which is kind of nice in a way too, because then you're not stuck in your inventory screen like filling up a magazine. You can actually just walk around while he's loading the gun back up. So I actually kind of like to just run it like this, and then maybe with a backup weapon like a cheap pistol or something, just for when someone gets up close to you. Now suppressors can start to make these guns pretty expensive, but you know, for sniping it might be good to have. I recommend the Daniel Defense Wave QD if you want to suppress this thing. Altogether, it would probably cost you around 50K for the suppressor, plus the little, you'll need a 7.62x51 muzzle brake for it. And if you're ever not sure how to find that, if you got the suppressor, you can link search from it, and it'll bring you all the different muzzle brakes that it attaches to. There are some for different calibers, so just double check, make sure when you mouse over it that it does indeed go on the M700. You just slap on the muzzle brake, the suppressor, you're good to go. Looks pretty cool too. Lastly, if you want, there's a little mod slot here. You can put a laser or flashlight on it for room clearing. Obviously, a bolt action rifle isn't great for clearing rooms anyway, but just know that the option's there. Let's take a look at a couple 9mm options that I feel are often overlooked. The 9x19 PST GZH and the 9x18 PMM rounds. Each of these are incredibly cheap and hit an important breakpoint of 50+ flesh damage, which is just enough to one-tap raiders and the scav boss guards that follow around Reshala and Gluhar. They offer a bit of penetration for lower end armor, but when using these rounds I highly suggest getting in the habit of aiming for the head, or if you have a really highly armored target with a face shield, you can unload on the legs as well. With this in mind, let's take a look at 3 SMGs which all have very high rates of fire. The MP5 SD is quite possibly one of my very favorite weapons in Escape from Tarkov, and is very likely the lowest recoil fully automatic weapon in the game at just 26 vertical recoil without any modding done to it. Make sure to specifically buy the MP5 SD from level 2 Peacekeeper if you can, as it'll already come with the suppressor, which is not only great for keeping quiet, but is also largely the reason for such low recoil, as it gives minus 20%. The only extra modding suggestions I would have for the MP5 SD is to pick up the MFI HK Universal Low Profile Scope Mount. This thing will let you put any reflex sight of choice on top. Again, I prefer the PK06, but really whatever you want to put on there is fine. Then the only other suggestion I might have is, because of such a high rate of fire, you may want to invest in a couple 50-round magazines for this gun. They're a little expensive, right around 26-27K each. So if you can swing it, maybe start the raid with at least one of these in your gun and then a bunch of 30-rounders as backup. But if you can't afford it, just maybe a pile of 30-rounders is fine. These are super duper cheap, as is the ammo, so it's really not going to break the bank to bring a whole bunch of magazines with you. Next we have the MP9. This was just added with patch point 12. This thing is incredible at 1100 RPM fire rate.
That's more like it.
This gun is unbelievably cheap on the flea market. If you check it out, it's less than 20K. And then all you really want to add is just pick up some 30-round magazines for it, stuff it with PST GZH, some of the cheapest ammo, and then just slap your reflex sight of choice on it. Pretty much good to go. Lastly, we've got the Pp9 Clin. I like this thing a lot. This is a little bit more of a meme, to be honest. The ammo, the PMM ammo, has a little bit higher penetration than the 9x19 PST. So that may be one argument for using it, but it does have a little bit worse recoil. It is, however, also pretty cheap, about 15K for the gun. You can also get this off scavengers really often. And then to get a sight on it, you just want the Rotor 43 RIS mount for PP Keter. That goes right in the front on top of the barrel, and that'll let you mount a sight. You can also stick a laser or flashlight on the bottom part if you want to. And again, this one's pretty much good to go. I would recommend 30 round mags for this as well. There are 20s, but again, high rate of fire on these SMGs with cheap ammo. The bigger you can get for magazines, the better. Next, we have two of my favorite guns in the game, the P90 and the FN57 pistol. These guns, along with their ammo, were just added with patch 0.12 and are quite powerful. The P90 has naturally low vertical recoil, decent ergonomics, and requires very little modding to get it ready for close quarters combat. And contrary to popular belief, it really isn't that expensive. The ammo for these guns is what really makes them stand out in my opinion. Your cheapest option for one that actually has decent stats is the L191 ammo. This is actually a tracer, so again, I kind of recommend it more for close quarters combat when, you know, giving away your position with a tracer really isn't that big of a deal. Factory would be a good example, or again, if you're clearing like the customs dorms or the buildings on military reserve. This ammo, it's only gonna run you, well, it's $2 from Peacekeeper, a little bit more from players. The interesting thing about it though is it says $2, but if you're actually buying them in bulk, this is rounding, right? So 300 bullets times $2 should cost $600, but it's actually 423. So make sure you're buying them in bulk because, you know, Tarkov doesn't deal with pennies, right? So it's just gonna always be rounding. Now, if you really don't want to run tracers, we also have the SS190 ammo. It says very similar stats to the 191. It's the same price from Peacekeeper, but it's a little bit more when players are reselling it. I think this ammo is a tidbit more popular just because it's not a tracer. And lastly, if you can afford it, the 193 ammo is has the highest armor penetration by just a little bit more, but again, it's a little bit more expensive than the 191. So again, all three of these are pretty viable. Pretty much just pick your poison. The cheapest one is the tracer, and then the most expensive one, of course, has a little bit more armor pen, so it's totally up to you. Now, this gun is actually super cheap on the flea market. It's usually running around 60K for one that actually has all the parts on it. So you want to scroll down a little bit past the receiver only ones. You can see these guys sitting at about 60, 65. You'll see like the green colored and the black colored ones. There's no difference in stats between them at all, so just pick whatever is cheaper or whatever you like better. Now for modding, the only thing I really like to do is if it comes with this really high rail, I feel like it's really awkward to use because when you put a sight on it, it's gonna be like way up here. So actually take the entire upper receiver off. You can just resell that and get a little bit of a return on your investment. And I like to pick up the FN90 upper receiver for P90. They also spell it like EFFEN. Let's actually take a peek at that. Yeah, this thing's only $5 grand, so super cheap. But when you slap that on instead, you can see that it brings your sight down way closer. I guess the only disadvantage is now you don't have these little side rails. So if you really wanted a flashlight or a laser, you might want to keep on the taller one. This is more preferential, but I think it looks a lot nicer and a little easier to use with the sight down low. If you want to use the reflex sight I was using in the clip there, it's actually the Leopold Delta Point. This is the little Delta Point that goes in on top of the hammer scope. And you need a little mount for it too, the cross slot mount base. If you buy the Delta Point and then just do a link search off it, it'll bring up the cross slot little mount for it, so you don't have to remember all those funky words, but just slap it right on. This thing's pretty much good to go. It only has one magazine right now, the 50 round mag, so usually just bring a few of those and some extra ammo. The reload time in raid on these is pretty slow. They'll see the load unload speed modifiers plus 75%. So I tend to bring a couple extra mags and really try not to rely on reloading them too much, just because it is so time consuming. But it kind of depends what you're working on. If you're expecting a lot of PvP contact, like in Factory, I might bring a couple extra mags. If you're gonna try to lay low and loot some reserve buildings, you know, you may be able to get away with fewer magazines. Now with the 5.7 pistol, honestly, this thing's pretty much ready to go as is. It comes with 20 round magazines. And these little green glow sights are actually really nice. You can see them super well even in the dark. It's pretty snappy, like when you ADS or when you aim down sights, like it doesn't have much sway to it, so you can acquire your target pretty quickly. If you want to modify it though, I would recommend picking up one of these Tactical UM3 sight mount. This will let you put a little reflex sight on top, and it's still got a slot for a laser or a flashlight on the bottom. You don't actually need that to mount a laser or flashlight though, since the gun's got a little rail on the bottom already, so it's kind of up to you. Really, you just want to buy this if you want to put a reflex sight on it. So again, I like the little PK06. This is my favorite reflex sight in the game. Just as an honorable mention here, the NC Star Tactical Blue laser is super cheap if you wanted a laser for it. But you can just slap everything right on. It's pretty much good to go. But like I said, even just without all the mods on it, this thing's pretty solid. This gun will run you around $300 US from Peacekeeper, just a tad more if you have to buy it from a player if you don't have them unlocked yet, but definitely worth every penny in my opinion. Lastly, let's move on to LPS GZH ammo, which is nearly identical stats to the mighty M80 round. Again, 80 flesh damage is a critical breakpoint in Escape from Tarkov, as it'll one-tap with thorax shot if the bullet penetrates your target's armor, and 42 armor pen is on the higher side of the ammunition we've looked at today. LPS can be found on the flea market pretty cheap, typically around the 170 ruble mark. While you can certainly throw these bullets into a cheap bolt-action Mosin, I highly recommend the SVD instead. This is currently the only weapon in the game that can fire 7.62x54 ammunition at semi-auto, making it absolutely devastating to any target and far more formidable against squads. There are a lot of modding options for the SVD, and I actually have a separate video for SVD modding on my channel, but for simple modding and to keep it budget, you can actually do a lot of similar stuff to the AKs and the Vepr Hunter. For example, you can actually take off the rear sight, and again, you can put my favorite TT01 on there with your reflex sight of choice if you want to have a little reflex sight in the middle. This is pretty good for factory, especially if you're working on Punisher and the Punisher task for Prapper and you want to get some close range kills. You can put the SVD low side mount on. This is actually made for the SVD, even though we've been using it on all sorts of other dovetail guns. This fits perfectly on there and it'll give you a rail on top so you can put any scope you want. Something like this Bravo, for example. Snap it right on. Good to go for some long range sniping. If you want to keep it cheaper for long range, you can use any of the PSO scopes. Again, I like the 1M2-1 the best because it's the one with the larger little chevron in the middle. That'll just go right on. Pretty simple. One mod that I would definitely choose to do no matter what though is take off the old pistol grip because it only gives you 5 ergonomics, and you can actually put the Rk3 on here. There's surprisingly a lot of the AK mods will work on the SVD. Slap that on, you get a nice ergonomics boost. This gun's big and heavy, so having extra ergonomics is a big deal because you'll be able to bring it up to your shoulder faster to square up on your target. Another really important thing with this gun, in my opinion, is I'd recommend taking out the 10 rounders and getting some 20 round magazines in there. These aren't super expensive. I think it'll be well worth the investment just to be able to crack off some more shots at Gluhar and his boys or squads, or just really any scenario. It'll just make you more versatile in general. This gun is just a little bit more expensive than some of the other ones we've been looking at on the flea market. For one that's actually put together, you'd be looking at only about 60K actually. It's not too bad. And then about another 8 or 9K for the Rk3 grip, and then whatever extra you'd like to pay for, you know, your preferred sight. So you're still actually looking at probably under 100K or maybe about 100K once you pick up your mags and your ammo. That's still pretty good, I would say. This is an extremely strong weapon. If you're still with me, guys, thanks so much for taking your time to check out this guide. If you're new to Escape from Tarkov or to this channel, consider subscribing for more content like this. I have several weapon modding tutorials, quest guides, and new to intermediate player guides on the channel already, with plenty more to come. If you guys would like to catch me during one of my live streams, you can find my Twitch link in the description below and follow me there as well. Let me know in the comments how some of these builds are working out for you, and if you have any corrections to this video or suggestions for future videos. Thanks for watching and good luck out there.